It is my pleasure to introduce Felicia Bernhard. Felicia is a pediatric board-certified occupational therapist with Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center in Ohio. She's been an occupational therapist for 4 years. She previously completed the Pediatric Occupational Therapy Fellowship at CCHMC. Felicia specializes in providing OT treatment to children with neurodiversity. She provides OT services intermittently to children ages 3 to 5 in the Therapeutic Interagency Preschool Program. Felicia has training on sensory processing differences and its impact on play and engagement within this population. And I was talking with our hub beforehand, was key in developing our core curriculum for us when she was doing her fellowship. So we've got someone with lots of great expertise that's going to share and talk to us today about sensory and neonatal abstinence syndrome and trauma. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Felicia, and let you share your screen.
All right, thank you so much. Good morning, everyone, and I'm so excited to be here with you today. I am just going to get this set up, share my sound. All right, let's see. Here we go. Okay, so today we're really just going to have a conversation together about what we know about sensory processing after some opioid exposure or really any exposure to trauma. And my name is Felicia, and this presentation was also created with my colleague, Kathy Krebs. So I I'm at Cincinnati Children's, and I do not have anything to disclose for this presentation. What we're going to talk about today is understanding definitions for sensory under-responsivity, sensory over-responsivity, and sensory craving. We're going to talk about the differences in what that looks like in our kids, and then we're going to talk about some strategies to address sensory concerns. The references that we use for this presentation come from the STAR Institute, Lucy J. Miller's work on sensational kids, and then also Kelly Mahler, who is key in developing interoception curricula. So we're going to start by talking about what are our sensory systems and how does this impact our own lives. So we learn about 5 senses usually in school: taste, touch, sight, smell, and hearing. There's 3 more senses that you don't hear about as much unless you're hanging out with an OT. And the first one is vestibular. So that is your position and movement in relation to gravity. So that system lives in your eyes and your ears. If you know anybody who gets car sick, usually one of the strategies to help with that is to put that person in the front seat so that they can see, to help process that movement, or let them drive the car if they are old enough to drive the car. Proprioception is input that you receive from your muscles and joints in regard to your body in space, as well as the concept of pressure. This is also our calming sensation. If you've ever stubbed your toe or hit your funny bone, the first thing that you do without thinking is to grab it and apply pressure, which helps that sensation feel less intense. So that's your proprioceptive system. And then interoception is sensations from your internal organs. And so interoception is your processing of hunger, pain, itch, body temperature, stress, just kind of your overall energy level. That's all coming from your interoceptive system. So what we're going to do is, for just a couple minutes, just a minute or so, if you are okay with it, I want you to just close your eyes and think about all the sensations that you feel on your body right now. So I'm going to give you a couple seconds and then I'll kind of talk you through what I'm experiencing. Okay, so I can feel my back against the chair that I'm sitting in. I can feel the clothes on my body. I can feel my tongue resting in my mouth. I can hear my air conditioner just kicked on, and I can hear my computer fan. I also see some blinking lights from the other computer that's sitting um, at this desk that I'm sitting at, as well as the lights in this room. So if if you're like me, you probably didn't notice a lot of those um, things that I just pointed out. Like you probably weren't thinking about feeling your tongue inside of your mouth or feeling the clothes that are on your body. But as soon as I pointed that out, you're like, oh my God, I feel that now, and it's kind of driving me insane. So for some people, they're not habituating um, to those feelings, they're feeling all of the things at once. And so as we talk about um, under responsivity and over responsivity and sensory craving, I feel like that's just a good activity to kind of get us in the zone. So today our work is going to be talking about sensory modulation. And I do want to point out that Lucy Jane Miller and the Star Institute do a lot of their work under sensory processing disorders. The current DSM does not label that as a diagnosis. So our work at Children's aligns with the DSM. And so we talk about sensory processing challenges or difficulties as opposed to labeling it as a disorder. Let's see, and I do want to point out here as well that you can be over responsive, under responsive, or craving. You can be more than one in one sensory system, which makes it a little extra tricky. But the kids that we're going to be talking about today mostly fall into the craving category. So what does sensory modulation difficulty look like? So it might be difficulty regulating input. So a small amount of input can feel very overwhelming, or a small amount of input can be registered as a really large amount of input. And another challenge is difficulty obtaining and maintaining an appropriate energy level, or being able to match your energy level, the right energy level for the task that you're completing. So an example of that is a child that goes out on the playground and has high energy and is running around and climbing, and that's totally appropriate for the playground. And then you have them line up and transition to the classroom, and guess what? We're still running around and climbing all over everything, and that is no longer appropriate. But there's not a lot of awareness to that child that that they need to shift their energy level. These kids will have trouble with just matching their energy level in general. So they might also be really lethargic, slow to warm up, or overly energetic. And they'll have difficulty finding their just right. So they may just really shift from really low to really high and never pass through that middle space. And the last challenge is adapting to things that happen in daily life. So a dog barking, a fire engine driving by, the vacuum turning on. They might have difficulty with transitioning between activities as well. So over-responsivity is also known as sensory avoiding or defensiveness. So a little bit of input is interpreted by the body as a large amount of input. So you can, the only system that we don't see over-responsivity in is proprioceptive, which is that calming system. So we see overresponsivity as responding too much, too long to sensory input. It's easily overwhelming, and we can sometimes see aggression or irritable, fussy or moody responses, or some defensiveness to touch. So the way that we intervene with this is we want to raise the child's tolerance for input, help them to get regulated. And we do this by introducing activities slowly with low intensity and having the child maintain a calm and alert state. So an example of this is if we're tactilely defensive and the classroom is playing with shaving cream, I wouldn't push that child's hands into the shaving cream and like, let's just do the thing. We're going to introduce it in a slower way to kind of work to that child's tolerance to be able to participate while maintaining a calm state. Under responsivity is when the child is less sensitive and less aware of input. So these are kids that you may not know that they have a raging ear infection until they go for a well check. They fall down and you're like, and they just bounce back up and haven't even noticed. Or they don't notice that you've tapped them on the shoulder unless they also saw you approach them. They may prefer inactive activities. And the way that we intervene with under responsivity is we want to increase arousal by doing fast, high intensity activities. So we kind of think of fast blast. And an example of this is like having the child stack big foam blocks and then going down a zip line that we have in clinic and crashing into those blocks. That would be like a movement activity that we might do that would hit that high intensity. So craving, this is where most of our kids with exposure fall. So these kids seem to need more input, but the more that they get, the more that they want. So they never really appear satiated. So this might look like wanting control of every situation. We interrupt and have a really hard time waiting. We could get really upset with redirection, and we tend to not have really good safety awareness. So these are your kids that are scaling the walls, climbing the bookshelves, jumping off of things. And then they can be intense and hard to calm, and then they're constantly on the go. So people will say, these kids sometimes look like they're driven by a motor, and they just go, go, go until they fall down asleep. Sensory cravers really like to roughhouse. They're constantly touching everything. They may not have good personal boundaries and know kind of where their space starts and stops and your space starts and stops. Sensory craving was previously called sensory seeking, and we moved away from that terminology because it sounded like a sensory seeker needs more input, but we're learning that they don't actually need more input. If they get more, they'll only want more. So what do we do for sensory cravers? So we need to know that we need to provide structure and movement-based activities to make them purposeful and functional. Sensory cravers often look for movement that does not help them regulate. And so we have to teach organization through movement activities, like start-stop activities is something we're going to talk a lot about. So red light, green light. Simon Says, hopping to get a puzzle piece and then returning back and having to stop and put that puzzle piece into the puzzle board, or helping to move items in the classroom, push their chairs from circle time to the lunch table, or carry a box of or a basket of books to pass around to the other kids in the class. We want to incorporate resistance in movement and just not allow our kids to kind of run free. Just like the example for the child that was on the playground. So we don't want to ever take recess away, but we want to know that that free movement is not going to be calming and regulating. These are kids that are not going to get their wiggles out, but they do still need that time to be active. We want to set limits, create boundaries, and then provide opportunities for success. These kids get a lot of redirection for safety, and we need to offer them an opportunity for success and praise when their bodies are calm. So this is a diagram of what we were talking about with the threshold model. So under responsivity has a low threshold for input. And our goal with intervention is to raise that threshold with slow, low intensity activities. With under responsivity, their threshold is high for input, and we want to lower that threshold with fast, intense activities. And then sensory craving doesn't fit this model. I really like the next photo to kind of show you what sensory craving looks like. So if you imagine a cup, for sensory under responsivity, we want to fill that cup up with input. For sensory over responsivity, we want to dump some of the input out of that cup. But sensory craving, the cup has a hole in it. It doesn't matter how much input you put in, the input's going to come right back out. And we're just going to keep looking for more to try to fill that cup up. So here is where we are going to jump in to our first breakout before we watch this video. Breakout or group discussion. I'm gonna let that decision go back to the leaders. But what I want us to think about is, what does this sensory information look like in the settings that you work with and the population that you're currently working with, or even what it looks like in your own life. So we'll take about 5 minutes to discuss your experience, and then jump back into to see this video.
Thank you, Felicia. I think we said, so since we have about 35, 40 spokes, that we'll just stay in our bigger group. That way we can all kind of share together. It's sometimes nice to hear the diverse experiences. So I'm wondering if you all want to just share in the chat, or if someone wants to unmute and chime in. What are your experiences with this?
I know just from experience with my own children, I have one that's, she'll fall down and doesn't cry or anything like that. And then I have a sensory craving child who is constantly just super active and wants to be in your space and touch everything and touch you and all of that. So that's been my personal experience just with my own children. I do coach softball, and so we have a child there, and she's not into big to being touched or anything like that. She'll kind of shy away from you if you get close and things like that. So I just find this just super interesting. So
I always think it's really awesome when after we talk about sensory processing, when you notice in other adults around you what people's preferences may or may not be. I think that's super cool.
Yeah, I think it's helpful. Abby is sharing in the chat. I found it very hard to recreate an OT session. Home carryover is hard because we don't have a zip line and phone blocks. So they've struggled with carryover there.
Well, just as an example, like we just don't sometimes have the space or the room to recreate, you know, it is what it is. And you have kids that maybe live in small apartments or small spaces, and it's just, it doesn't, my own son gets OT, so I believe in OT and I love it, but I find this to be one of the harder disciplines for carryover.
Yeah, sometimes our equipment is hard to recreate into that home environment, but we will talk about some things that can be really accessible to the home. And I think that's a super important thing to think about. So recreating what can happen in the clinic, how does that carry over into other settings?
And Elsie's even saying, Abby, that she's like, that's the case today, is that discussion. So this is the beauty of our case discussions is how do we do that? And Sue is sharing, I commonly saw children touching everything, unable to play with any object for more than a few seconds. Items frequently put in their mouths. Parents so usually focused on stopping behavior, but didn't really know how to guide the behavior. Which I think is those sensory craving kids, right? There's just so much to manage that sometimes it's hard to figure out how to pull that back. Yeah, lots of sensory craving that Carly is seeing as well when she supervises visits with the child and the dad. So he, seems to want to control things, but the more he gets, the more he wants. So I think that's a helpful thing. I think take that away too, right? We talk about movement breaks for these kids, but that sounds like it's probably the worst thing we could do, unless we do it the right way.
Yeah, the break may have to include something else besides just movement. But I don't know how you feel, Felicia, about sensory breaks, but I've certainly seen that be helpful. And then those breaks are best when they're individualized for that child and not just some global go jump on a trampoline thing or something. As a child therapist, I guess one of the ways I saw it manifest was children who got labeled as aggressive when they had vestibular proprioceptive kinds of things, and so they were a lot of movement and got out of control, or they needed a lot of deep contact to know that they were in touch with somebody, and then particularly the proprioceptive, then seeking, we called it at that time. I'm really glad to get this new term craving, because immediately it made sense to me. But anyway, they're bumping into people and they're leaning hard on people, and it's not necessarily aggression, where there are other things going on.
Yes, movement breaks I think are huge. Academics, I feel like, have become more and more of something where we're supposed to kind of sit and listen. But I love when classrooms have movement breaks with some type of activity that's related to the learning. So I had a teacher in high school who would make us stand up and make a letter with our body to remember something. And so it was a way to stand up from your desk and move your body, or songs at circle time that have movements. And even if you are doing something like jumping on a trampoline, doing something that is calming after. One of my favorite examples is there is a song or a circle time activity where you're doing a rainstorm, and the rainstorm starts with light tapping, and then it turns into kind of drumming on your lap, and then it turns into snapping, and then clapping, and then it goes back to snapping, back to kind of drumming on your lap, and then back to tapping. until the rain completely stops. And I like that the kids have to work on that progression up and then that progression back down before they're jumping back into their learning.
That sounds like a great activity. Thanks for sharing, Felicia. And I'll encourage you. I know I want to keep us moving. This is where I always tend to, I love hearing everybody talk. I want to make sure that we have time for you to get through things. There's a great, Michelle was sharing some experiences with her son, and we've seen some other folks sharing some of their experiences with kids. And Michelle even has a great example about how her son was sent home with a sensory toy because he was breaking crayons. And the teacher thought, instead of just labeling him as a bad kid who's breaking crayons, thought to give him something to do with his hands to help with that. But yeah, lots of great experiences from everyone. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Okay, well, let's jump into this video, and we kind of have a pre and a post video at the end of this slide. And so what I want you to do when you're watching this video is watch his movement and how he really doesn't have any grading in his movement. It's all going to be pretty fast.
Can you put it on purple or do you want to put it on blue? Which one? All right, you ready? All right, we're gonna go backwards. You ready? Ready? 1, 2, 3, 1. Okay, come on up. Are you ready? Oh, this is so good. And back. Come on up. Oh, come on, you can do it. Come on, you can do it. Pretend you get better. Pull. Come on, pull. Good work. All right, are you ready? Ready? Oh, good job. All right, come on. Oh, good job. Be so careful. Be so careful. All right, one more time. One more time. Oh, yeah, good job. Oh, wait a minute. You gotta get your glass up so you can throw it and get those pumpkins. Okay? Ready? Don't go backwards. You got your knees. Okay?
Okay, so that was Kathy, my colleague. And what we really want to think about with this kiddo is he really threw himself into extension. So laying back over that therapy ball, which is a really alerting position. So that can be one of those more intense positions to get that vestibular input. So we were talking about the zip line, laying backwards over something like a couch or a therapy ball provides some similar input to that. But he really wasn't able to go slowly back and then slowly up. When he would get to a certain point, he was almost throwing his body into Kathy. So there was no real engaging of his muscles. And so that this activity was actually too challenging for him and did not provide regulating input. It really just kind of made him a little bit more alert. And so in a couple slides, we're going to see another activity that's a better match for him. So our findings from experience so far is that children who've been exposed often live in sensory craving. They don't respond to the threshold theory of practice. Much of what we know about sensory treatment really doesn't apply to this population. And it's really important that we provide movement that's organizing. So it's not necessarily getting more movement, but we want to allow for that movement to be organizing. And ways to do that can be.
There's all kinds of great stuff in the chat. Well, we can kind of revisit. And Alicia was, and so some folks talking about how there's a baseball team and they're really good at redirecting. And Alicia was sharing, it's hard to navigate what to correct and what to let go. So, and I think that's the challenge. And John, you had a great input here. I don't know, while Felicia is talking, do you want to elaborate on your response here?
Sure. I think we sometimes get trapped in a false dichotomy that we either, when a child's doing a behavior that we uh, feel is inappropriate in some way or potentially harmful or whatever it is, too loud. I mean, so we have and we're trying to think about what's behind that behavior. It could be, is it sensory something or other? In our case today, we tend to have that either or a way of thinking where we say, well, should I correct this or should I let it go, as Alicia put in her post? And I'm saying that, well, maybe there's a third way. And I think this is something that philosophically might apply to a lot of situations in our lives, that we tend to think kind of black and white, uh, you know, either or, and the world is really much more complex than that. And when we're thinking about kids or about conflicts we're in with other people, I'm right or you're right. Sometimes finding a third way leads us to a more gentle and successful outcome. With children, then that way may be a redirection. It may be just expressing empathy. This is really hard for you right now, or naming it. It feels really good to climb high. What else could you do right now, depending on the age of the child? So it could be a number of things, but I'm just saying, let's expand our thinking from either or to what else could we do?
I think that's a great point. And I think, is it Abby that was saying too, she agrees, and that naming it too is just such an important part of that. Name it to tame it. I love the quote.
It's are you familiar with Dan
Siegel.
Dan Siegel and Tina Bryant? Yes.
Yeah.
From The Whole Brain Child. Yeah, name it to tame it. Mm-hmm.
But yes, to go off of the name it, tame it, I love to use fast body and slow body language with kids. So, wow, it looks like you have a really fast body right now. This is a slow body activity. So let's help your body slow down, and then, working with the child to find some activities that can help them get that language and start to know, okay, I have to slow my body down for this. Okay, so some key strategy ideas are to incorporate children into the classroom. So giving them some movement that requires resistance, stacking chairs, carrying boxes of toys back to the shelf, and then building in opportunities for praise when children are engaging in calming activities. So when they're sitting in the reading section of the classroom and appropriately looking at books, or when they're calmly building with Duplos with a peer, and then build in opportunities for organized movement into classroom routines, such as tiptoeing or hopping from the playground to the classroom, or some structured movement during classroom time, or doing some animal walks, like walking like a crab from one center to the next. So let's watch this video of this is our post video. And then after this, we'll have another just 5-minute discussion about some other strategies that we've seen to be helpful in our own work.
Can you try again? Make sure you stop on each shape. You got it. Mm-hmm. Keep going. Whoa. Remember? 4 blue. You might have to carry some of blue in your hand and some in your scooper.
How about if I do this?
That's a good idea.
This is your product. It's a round run. You run all the time. You're never gonna see the muffins again.
All right, put them in the muffin pan.
So, sensory. This is muffin.
Okay, so I love this video to show how fast this child was going in the beginning. He was like hop, 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 and was stumbling. And then he tried again and was stopping to label the colors as he jumped. And you could see his body work on, okay, move, stop, move, stop. And then how we were also working on, he had a goal at the end of it. Oh, I need to go get 4 blue muffins. And now I'm going to hop back to put them away. So this was a better match for his particular sensory craving. But I'd like to open it up now to some other strategies or other activities that you have seen work in your experience to help any sensory cravers in your life.
So I work with very young children, infants and toddlers, and then sometimes old ones that are 3 and 4 and 5. But I've had some success with blowing bubbles and then letting the kids just pop them as they are impulsively almost driven to do developmentally, let alone if they have a sensory seeking issue. But again, that's the old language that's still in my brain. Craving. I need to start changing that. Anyway, and then and then say, okay, I'm going to blow another bubble and let's count to 2, and I'm going to count to 2, and then you pop it. 1, 2, boom, and then eventually 5 and 7 and so forth, so that there's the impulse, there's the regulation of that impulse, and then there's the satisfaction of popping the bubble. So it requires some regulation in that process. Red light, green light. Mother, may I? Those kinds of things with my preschoolers were things that I did to work on these kinds of issues.
I was going to say, I have a kid that what I probably should have further elaborated a little bit, and I have an idea of that, is I have a kid that doesn't really, like, he's almost under sensory to a certain extent. Like, he doesn't know how to do those kind of things or how to play even or anything like that. So I've learned, like, if you engage other kids with that activity that you're wanting them to do, so like running, kind of like what you were saying as far as like relay races with them, or okay, now we're going to run in the kitchen, who can get there first over there, okay, now we're going to run and grab this, who can grab that first, that kind of stuff kind of works.
Great, thanks for sharing. So Alicia, I'm hearing you've got that you've got the opposite from that sensory craving child, and using that modeling and some of those fun activities. That's been a nice way to work that. That's a great example.
During visits with,
Yes, I'm sorry, go ahead, Carly.
Oh no, during visits with this kiddo that I had kind of mentioned, a big issue is getting him to like sit down and eat his food that dad brings him. So dad has kind of very creatively redirected it into a drive-through. So he brings like a battery operated little car each time that the kiddo can sit in. So he has to drive through daddy's drive-through, and he gets to order his food, and then he gets to eat his food. And so that creates kind of a way for him to connect the playing with the desired effect. So that has worked out really well for him.
What a fun and creative idea. And I love that's like that pacing stuff that Felicia was talking about too, right? Like, order your food and have that. And he's got that fun thing of the car. Super cool.
That's an awesome idea. Freeze dance is another one. So you have to move your body and dance, and then when the music stops, you have to notice that the music stopped, and you have to stop your body.
Okay, and I see a great question here that Lisa is asking of the group about routines at home. She's wondering if anybody has strategies that have been successful in daily routines. She says, I picture a family getting ready to go out the door and it's chaos, and how that would be for a child with this profile. So I don't know, Felicia or others, if you have thoughts or ideas of ways to kind of help incorporate these strategies into some of those times that are going to be more challenging for these kiddos.
I think some of my ideas would be visuals are helpful. It could be as simple as drawing little pictures on a piece of paper that, like, first we're going to brush your teeth, then we're going to get our clothes on, then we're going to eat breakfast, and whatever order you might go in. And then if you have stairs, you can kind of add that heavy work by having go up the stairs, brush your teeth, come back down, and see what's next. Go up the stairs, get your clothes on, come back down the stairs. If not, you could do, okay, let's jump like a frog to the bathroom, or race to the bathroom and then tiptoe to our room, but adding just some motor work in there as you're transitioning.
I would say, as the parent that has a kid that's like that from time to time, I would say lower the bar as low as possible. So sometimes, especially if the kid doesn't sweat or anything like that, I put their clothes on the night before. Or, we're going to eat something small if we're trying to get out the door that morning. I'm not going to worry about some 4-course meal. Expectations are going to be super low because you're going to get food at school or at daycare, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, right? And that sets you up for success. That's that, right? So you have less to have to deal with, and you can kind of work in that way. So I'm seeing, so Joe is talking about how her girls have a morning chart on their door that they check off tasks. Oh, that's another nice one. So it kind of works on that visuals, and there's a motor skill they can use to get to the next task. So I'm hearing a lot of like structure with stuff built in, and making sure that those, low expectations and high rewards is what Abby's saying. So, and Michelle is talking about struggles at mealtime, Felicia. Think about that. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts around mealtime.
I think seating is a big thing. So making sure that your child is in a chair where they're supported. So if they're sitting in an adult chair, putting like a stool under their feet is a helpful strategy. And then trying to minimize distractions. So maybe turning off the TV if that's a possibility. And also thinking about, just like that example of the child who was on the playground and was running around and then comes into the classroom and is still going to be running around. Think about an activity between like free play and your meal time, if that's a possibility that might help your child to slow down, to focus on eating.
I've even had some kids that have had difficulty with mealtime, a lot from the aspect of being able to sit and kind of focus on the task at hand. And I've had like this stretch exercise band. You can put that around the legs of a chair so their legs can rest on it and bounce, and allow some movement while they focus on work. And I'll tell kids, like, this way we can move, but we can still kind of work on what we need to do. And whether that's like mealtime or like homework after school or even at school, it's a really simple thing you can kind of add on and adapt the environment for them.
I like that idea.
So I'd like to just respond to Michelle's chat, if I could. You have a son that sounds a lot like my grandson. Um, And I have to tell you that my grandson really benefited when I finally convinced my daughter to take him to OT. Um, he had about 6 months of sensory integration type OT, and it really helped him. And now they have a certificate that he got when he left that has a list of that he wrote of the things that were helpful to him in OT, and they can refer back to those. He's now 8. He was 6 when he went to OT. But, uh, that control, wants to be in control. First thing is, okay, rather than giving directions, offer him choices. Then he's in control. So he can, let's say it's get your shoes on is what you want to tell him to do. You can say, do you want to put on your right shoe first or your second shoe, your left shoe first? So he has a little bit of control, and that kind of thing is something to experiment with if you haven't tried that. Um, Again, the naming of it, or just the noticing, man, you move so fast, it's hard to get through without bumping into something or whatever. So you're just making him more conscious of his own body in the moment without a valuing, without a that's good or that's bad. Just it is. This is who you are, and that helps him maybe have a little more consciousness of that. Those are just a couple of things, but anyway, wanted to respond.
Yeah, thanks, John. And Pam was wondering, Felicia, do activities that are modified for age, like mindfulness, yoga stretches, or massage play, have any helpful role?
Yes, I love all of those things. So I have in clinic a book called Yoga Bug, and I think there's one called Yoga Whale, and they're little board books of kids doing some different yoga poses like animals, and they're pretty simple, which those are awesome. But I've also started to kind of collect just different kinds of books about emotional regulation. I think teaching through reading is a really nice thing to do. So I have a book, When Dragons Get Mad. I have a book on interoception that's called I Feel Something, and it's just these little spots talking about like something's going on in my body, but I need help to figure out what it is. And recently I found a meditation for kids where you're just kind of coaching them to lay on the ground and in a comfortable spot and kind of walking them through a body scan. And it's really nice because when kids are laying down, just kind of flat, I call it laying like a starfish. You'll notice that they will automatically move from chest breathing to belly breathing as they relax. So I love to do that after like a fast motor activity like freeze dance.
Yeah, that's a great point. And we had a sharing of cosmic yoga on YouTube. Is a nice place, a nice source for yoga. So we have 2 minutes. All right, looks like you're at questions, Felicia, is that right?
Yes, yep.
Okay, good. We have 2 minutes for questions live, and then you guys are always welcome when we start talking about our challenge and opportunity to pepper in questions as well. But I'm wondering if anybody has any final questions for Felicia. We've been lucky enough to be able to kind of chime in and ask things as we go.
Hi. I don't have time to type it, but I just acquired a child on my caseload that he's 2.5. He'll be 3 in November and will transition out of our PACE program. And high energy, perpetual motion machine. And but the one thing that he likes to do is climb. And mom is just ever vigilant because he will climb on the stove, try to climb on the refrigerator.
climb on the dining room table. So there's no caution there. So we've talked about heavy work. We've done some calming activities, and but when he is in high energy mode, the climbing is the safety issue. And I was just, because they live on a very busy street, and so activity has to go on in the house, in the home, rather than in the yard. What kind of activities to redirect that climbing could I be using or suggesting to the parents?
So I almost also wonder about almost like a social story for him to learn about kind of from his perspective,
Mhm.
unsafe climbing versus safe climbing. So writing that in a positive way to him.
Okay.
But you could do, it's hard to kind of redirect climbing when there isn't a safe place for him to climb.
Right.
But sometimes little obstacle courses, depending
Mhm.
on what the family has in their home. So if their couch cushions detach, or they have a coffee table where he could climb under the coffee table, through the couch cushions, and then dive into some pillows,
Right.
and then repeat. But just kind of getting creative. Sometimes I'll put a sheet over a dining room table and turn that into a tunnel. But just trying to get creative with your space to allow movement that is safe and okay for him to do.
Okay. I know mom was, she's got latches on the stove because he was climbing in the oven, um, uh, jumping off the stove door,
Yes.
so, but while I was there for my session, she had put a chair next to the stove and piled a lot of stuff on it, books and things, thinking it would be a hindrance to him climbing. Well, he climbed on top of the books and was ready to step on the stove. And so we talked about a safety gate, and I said, but I guarantee you he will climb over the gate. It might give you the few seconds you need to redirect him. And we talked about redirecting, not this, let's do this. Feet on floor. I tried to encourage her to positively state something, not necessarily say, don't climb, but feet on floor. And then immediately give him something that he can do, pushing a chair across he likes to push a chair. And I said, all right, there you go. Let him push the chair down the hallway, that type of thing. But I know climbing equipment in the home, just unless you have a huge basement where you can create your own gymnasium. But I was just, I like the obstacle course idea. I think mom would be up for that type of thing. So, and maybe have one ready. So if he gets ready to go to the stove, then she could say, under the table. Right. And big boxes are a lot of fun too, where he can even hide away in a box, my one son, he would sit in this huge Gaylord box and just calm himself down and then come out later and play. And then all of a sudden, all three of my boys were in the box. But so I think I'll suggest the obstacle course, maybe have a big box handy for him to crawl in, maybe with his favorite blanket for calming. But yeah, my heart went out to her, because until he goes to bed at night, she's got to be ever vigilant. And because it won't be long before he'll figure out how to turn on the stove. So.
Right. So Susan, thank you. Thank you for sharing that case. I think it's helpful for us to, understand how it's all those different barriers that come up. And Michelle even brought up an interesting point from the trauma lens. I'm wondering, Michelle, I know we're we're headed into case time, but maybe you could finish us up, just kind of thinking about these kiddos from a trauma perspective. And can you just kind of share with everybody what you put in the chat and maybe elaborate just in like a minute or two?
Sure. So I just said, if you haven't had a chance to look at the chat, a lot of times, and you'll see this, and we've talked about this in all the case examples, is you've got these kiddos who are most comfortable in this high energy zone. So every single person has a comfort zone. So if you think about where you're most comfortable, is it when you're relaxing? Is it when you're hanging out with friends? Like, do you prefer like a moderate level of activation? Well, some people prefer that high energy level. And for kiddos who've had trauma or in utero exposure, which we don't often think about as a traumatic event, but it certainly is. They've learned that they're safest when they're active. And so that transition from high activity and then taking them out of their comfort zone, especially if you do it really quickly, a lot of times these kids will rebound and they end up in this like even more activated state. And so if you're working with kids and you see that happen, just a note to yourself is that you took them out of their comfort zone too quickly. And so one strategy would be to do a slow downgrade. So instead of going from a high activity like running down to, okay, now I need you to sit in your seat, which would be a really fast transition, would be to do something like a little bit less intensive. So going from running to a resistant stretching, then we're moving more into like, okay, can you sit or can you stand in one place, and then can you sit? And here the emphasis, is on having kids have lots of repeated practice. It takes a while. Like, they had to learn that that high energy is safe, and now you have to unlearn that high energy is maybe not the best place to be all of the time, because it doesn't always help you meet your goals. And that takes time and practice. And so, helping parents understand this, and teachers, if you are a teacher, like, we want kids to get it really fast, and that's just not a realistic expectation, unfortunately. So.
Thanks for sharing, Michelle. That was my kiddo yesterday in clinic. In fact, we were talking, and my colleague was saying, he doesn't move like a kid with ADHD, but that's what everyone was saying. And I'm sitting here thinking, next week when he comes in, we need to work on that. Yeah, movement is safe for him, and we need to figure it out. I'm used to the kids where the safety is they pull their hood over and they're more of the like curl in kiddo. But I think it's helpful for you to remind us that sometimes it's these sensory craving kids and these like active kids, and that's how it shows up for them. Also, we have one session left, as I said, so we will be wrapping up next in 2 weeks with our session. We'll be talking about systems, supports, and barriers, and thinking about those pieces. So I'd love you all to come. We'll also, at the end, you'll get a post-evaluation to give us feedback, because we will plan to do this again, probably in 2022. So be thinking if there's suggestions you want to give us live in 2 weeks at the end, you can do that, as well as in our post-evaluation summaries. But thank you so much for joining us. And I hope you guys enjoy the first day of October, maybe a pumpkin patch and the apple orchard, just a walk and some falling leaves. I love fall, can you tell? So have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you guys in 2 weeks.